If anybody has contracts to turn in, I can take those now. The CRN number is 30376, and the course is 2111, I believe, 111 or something like that. 211, 1112, 211.
Wait, can I see that?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Oh, I typed it up.
All right. Okay. Now wait till 4:30 or so to call roll. Now, I didn't realize when I was making up the syllabus that I was giving the test the day after Super Bowl Sunday. But then again, I don't know how many of you are football fans.
I'm a big football fan. I don't think we should do it.
Anyway, whatever. Anyway, test is next Monday. We've got to move on. All right, anybody have any questions? Okay, we'll move on. We've got a chapter to cover. I want to finish chapter 15 today and then move on to chapter 16. Yeah, that's okay. I have plenty of paper clips that save us both. All right, we ended up last time with Oliver Cromwell. That's what I call it. Oh, okay, fine.
Sorry.
All right. I believe I mentioned how the people of England thought they were doing themselves a favor by getting rid of King Charles I. They chopped his head off and then wound up wishing that he were back on the throne. Oliver Cromwell came in, and he did not know how to separate church from state. He outlawed card playing, dice rolling, puppet shows, taverns, a whole lot of other things. Tried to encourage his people to dress in drab-colored clothes and not dress up. He insisted on extreme modesty in the women. Essentially, the people they wound up not liking him and his Puritan ways, and he helped give Puritanism a bad name. Puritanism was to get a bad name on both sides of the Atlantic. The original settlers of Massachusetts were Puritans, and then the Puritans were in England for a while. If you say, I've never met a Puritan, yeah, you might have, but they don't go by the name Puritan anymore. They have since changed their name to something else, and they are around. I won't tell you what the name is, because I have some negative remarks I'm going to be saying about them. Anyway, about the outlawing of the card playing, some of the people tried to get around this by playing their cards in secret. And the same way with the puppet shows. They'd set up a puppet show in somebody's, call it a living room, set up a puppet show and have a constable post at the door. And the constable would watch out, not a constable, they'd have somebody, a lookout post at the door to watch for a constable. When a constable came by, the person would say, "Constable," loud enough to where nobody persons inside the house could hear them. And everybody would hide their puppet shows under their couches or between their floorboards or up in the attic, hide their puppets really fast until the constable was gone. Then they get their puppets out and resume the show where they left off. Folk, in the next chapter, we're going to be talking about another group of people who have tried doing the same thing, outlawing drinking, outlawing certain types of worldly amusements. I'm going to have more to say about that when I get to the next chapter. There are merits to these, what am I trying to say? Some of these things have some merit. I mean, my dad was hard against card playing. Why was he hard against it? Because he played a lot of cards as a youngster himself and became addicted to it. He finally quit, and he wouldn't allow us to play. When we got older, the kids took it up. We played for a while, and then number one, got addicted to it. Number two, got sick of it, and finally put it away, and never got them out again. But again, I guess maybe we had to play them ourselves just to see what was wrong with it. All right, I'm going to say now what I intended to say in the next chapter. I personally think these issues are better off if left up to each individual to decide and not left up to Big Brother or the government to decide them for us. And that's true whether it be drinking, smoking, or card playing, or dice rolling, or gambling in any form. That each person decide for himself or herself. These issues will be better off. A lot of times these things are just phases we go through, stages we go through, and get it all out of our system, and then move on with the business of living. I mean, I had an uncle one time who said, I played a lot of checkers as a kid, and he said there's nothing wrong with it, but after a while I just quit playing. I got sick of it and put it down and quit playing. Most of us go through that stage. We play a lot of these games as kids. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but hey, again, let each individual decide for himself. Rather let some big brother or big man on the throne decide the issues for us. Oliver Cromwell ruled England for 11 years, died, and he did not take the title of king. He said the office of king was unnecessary, so he was the real ruler, but he ruled with more authority and more of a dictatorial. Was more dictatorial than any king would have been. For about a year, they put Richard, his son Richard Cromwell, I didn't even put his name there because he's not that important, and it soon became obvious to Richard Cromwell and everybody else that Richard Cromwell did not have the stuff to lead. So they went to the son of Charles I, who was living in exile, and said, hey, you come back and be our king.
Charles II.
Charles II, yeah, so they brought Charles II from exile. But Charles II knew full well what had happened to his father. His father had his head chopped off. So Charles II knew he had to rule through Parliament. So Charles II came in, and he governed. He was the king when William Penn became the leader of Pennsylvania. He was close friends to William Penn. Among others, we'll talk about more about William Penn later. In fact, the reason he gave William Penn the land he did, Charles II owed the Penn family lots of money, which it became obvious he could not pay. Charles II operated his budget in the red all the time. And unlike his father, he did not try to raise taxes illegally, so he just stayed in debt. Otherwise, he's remembered as a fairly good king. Now, Charles II had 14 illegitimate children, none of whom were eligible for the throne. So when he died, he had no legitimate children, no children by his lawful wedded wife. So when he died, the throne went to his brother, James. Now, Charles II was secretly Catholic. Officially, he was Protestant because he knew that's what the people of England expected of their king. So officially, he was Protestant, but he was secretly Catholic. And again, to his credit, he, for the most part, now there were a few exceptions, but for the most part, he did not persecute either side. He even developed a tolerance for the Quakers, something that previous leaders of England hadn't done. But during his reign, mostly religious tolerance was practiced. Then he, to show that he actually was Catholic at heart, on his deathbed, he had himself baptized into the Catholic Church. His brother now, James II, was openly Catholic. That would not have been so bad. In fact, maybe James's descendants might still be on the throne today. They aren't. But his descendants, if he had not made the mistake of trying to make England into a Catholic country. But he began to put Protestants in jail, executed a few, and At one point, one of his judges hung 250 Protestants at one time. Then he made the mistake of having Sir Isaac Newton go before the same judge. Sir Isaac Newton was an extremely popular man, a popular scientist, who we talk about in the next chapter. And the people of England rose up in rebellion. So the biographies of Newton make it sound like that sending Newton to this judge was his biggest mistake. And actually, he made a lot of mistakes right close together. But the people of England went to his cousin, William, the Prince of Orange, who was a grandson of James I. And they persuaded William to come over from Holland and to take the throne. Well, when James II got the news that William was starting to set sail, in those days they didn't have radio or fast communication, so he had to realize by the time he got the news that William had decided to set sail, the fact is William already had set sail. By the time he got the news that William had landed, he realized William had already been there a day or two. But in a small country like England, news travels from the seacoast to London in a matter of a few hours. But he got the news that William had landed, and then he got the news that all of England had flocked to William, realizing what had happened to his father, Charles I. James II fled. One of William's first acts as king was to release all religious and political prisoners. Granted, the horse thieves and pickpockets stayed in jail, but the religious and political prisoners were all released. And England had a big celebration. This celebration is sometimes called the Glorious Revolution. It's also known as the Bloodless Revolution. And as for James, he wound up going to France, then he went to Italy. He tried to get the throne a couple of times and failed. His son tried to get the throne and failed. His grandson, Bonnie Prince Charles, tried to get the throne of Scotland. He was just Scotland, and he failed. Their descendants will still tell you we are the rightful heirs to the throne of England. Sorry, folk, but James here lost up and got booted. About 4 times in history, Parliament has booted a king out of office. The first one was Edward II, way back in the 1200s. Then they chopped off Charles I's head. Then they forced James into exile. And in the 20th century, they told Edward VIII that he could not have the throne because he chose to marry someone that the church did not approve of. This happened in 1936. So 4 times in history at least, the Parliament has told the kings, you can't be king anymore. And this was one of the examples. Now, from this glorious revolution, and from otherwise called the Bloodless Revolution, from that came a document called the Bill of Rights. We'll be talking more about a Bill of Rights when we come to the American Constitution, but the English got the Bill of Rights before we did. Their Bill of Rights came in the 1600s, late 1600s, and the main thing it guaranteed was the right of religious freedom. Now, it contains something else that might sound strange to us, but when I went to Great Britain back in 1987, our tour guide said, now, after we got rid of James II, we passed a law that the king must be a Protestant. Now, I know to you American ears that may sound strange, but that law is still on the books. I don't know what ever happened if they got a Catholic king in the 21st century, but anyway, according to the law, that the king must be a Protestant, still on the books. That was part of the Bill of Rights. Basically, they were saying England tolerates all faiths, but officially we're a Protestant country. That was the last time any king tried to make England into a Catholic country. They realized it was impossible. All right. So much for the political history in chapter 14, and probably chapter 15. We do want to mention a couple things about the cultural history. I want to introduce you to the word Baroque. Oops. I'll start again. Baroque art features, it's known as action art. They strive for two things, filling up the canvas and extreme realism. And your book shows two examples of Baroque art on page 446. You'll notice in Baroque art there's very seldom any such thing as a spacious sky, an empty sky with nothing but clouds. I mean, they fill up the entire canvas. And even though if they don't depict things like a wide open ocean with one sailboat in the middle of it, because they try to put action on every inch of the canvas. And realism. Now, we're going to be talking more about realism every time we come to art. Now, I'm not that much into art, but one of my daughters is majoring in art at the University of Georgia. And she might even know more about this than I do. And if any of you know a lot about art, you might know more than I do. But realism in modern art is left to the camera. They say, let the camera get the realistic picture. Instead, we strive today to paint mood, subjective painting, but not realism. But Baroque art strove for realism. Now, Baroque music generally tends to be fast and even feature a lot of what I'd call discords. Now, again, if you're not into music, you might not know what I'm talking about, but in your music, you have your third chord, your fourth chord, your fifth, sixth, and seventh. Again, how many of you know what I'm talking about? But your second chord tends to be a little bit discordant. And Baroque music would feature some discordant notes, discordant chords in their music. Again, I'd better stop there because I don't know as much about Baroque music as I've enough really to make a good comment on it. But another thing I must mention, though, is England, particularly Shakespeare. In fact, your book only devotes part of a page to England and Shakespeare, actually the whole page to England and Shakespeare. I understand that in American high schools, Shakespeare is still required. The two plays we had to study in my sophomore year was Romeo and Juliet. And in our junior year, it was Macbeth. But in the meantime, I picked up on King Lear. I mean, well, many years later, I went and saw the movies. Macbeth, they made a movie out of Macbeth, and they made a movie out of King Lear. Shakespeare, well, put it to you this way. The plays did not come about until the advent of the Protestant Reformation, largely because the Catholic Church highly frowned on plays, and I have had more than one student, well, why? And one reason I can come up with was that plays tend to depict a non-real world as opposed to realism, but also the personal lives of most of your actors and actresses all down through the ages have left a lot to be desired. And any of you who keep up with Hollywood figures know what I mean, I think. I mean, hey, the person who killed Abraham Lincoln, does anybody know what profession he held? He was an actor. Yeah, the person who shot Abe Lincoln was an actor. And Abe Lincoln admired him and said, hey, I'd like to meet that man, and had no idea that Booth was really a Confederate sympathizer. But a lot of times, some people will go so far as to say that they believe that a really good actor cannot separate his life on the screen or on the stage from his life in the real world. And the acting out of a bad person that he does on stage carries on to his life in the real world. Now, each of you can make up your own minds what you believe about that. Again, until the advent of the Protestant Reformation, you just did not have much in the way of theatrics. You had it in the Greeks. The Greeks had plays. So did the Romans. Then the Christianity came along and outlawed the whole business. This takes us up to Shakespeare. About the time when I was still in high school, there came an issue of, did Shakespeare even exist? Any of you know anything about that subject or have any ideas on it? Quite honestly, I don't know. I mean, hey, the plays are real enough. There is a rumor that an ordinary man in those days could not have written the plays that Shakespeare wrote. That actually the most likely candidate for the authorship of Shakespeare's plays is Sir Francis Bacon. And Bacon is suspected of having been an illegitimate child of Queen Elizabeth I. This is mere suspicion, it can't be proven. But why would they suspect? Well, a lot of Shakespeare's plays dealt with royalty. And it is believed that royalty would pass a lot of its secrets down the line from one high up royal figure to another. You might say from one king and queen to another. And pass these secrets. And Shakespeare took a lot of these plays, but when he took a lot of the secrets that had been passed down to him and made plays out of them, that it has been said that an ordinary man could not have known that much about royalty unless he was part of the royal family himself. Now, on a personal note, I disagree with the logic. I mean, they're also saying that the common man would not have been intelligent enough to write plays like that. Again, folk, I have to disagree with that. Here's why. I mean, being an American, most of us who are Americans are descended from European poverty, either European, Asian, or African outcast. Asian outcast, European, I'm not knocking, I'm descended from a poverty-stricken European myself, actually a bunch of poverty-stricken Europeans, and am I the least bit ashamed of that? I mean, I'm not the least bit embarrassed to tell anyone that. Most Americans are descended from poverty-stricken Europeans, and hey, that doesn't mean that we were the least intelligent. We might have been the least educated, but we eventually educated ourselves. But I do think a common man could have possibly had the intelligence to write the plays, but then about the royal secrets being, again, I don't know what all was being whispered down the line, and some of it might not even have been true. Anyway, anybody have any ideas on it? Shakespeare's plays are considered high quality, and there are many a person who have spent their entire life studying Shakespeare, and they have no doubt written into Shakespeare's plays ideas that Shakespeare never even thought of. Whether this is bad or good, each of you can decide. All right, before the next chapter, I'm going to pause and call roll. This is 27. Men, Daniel, Ken. Jamie, Dennis, my partner, Dennis Show. K-O-N-G. Hui, H-U-I-Z-O-U. Zoma, Clarence, Lillian, Jonathan, Cynthia, Jessica, Jackie, Leonard, Evan, Gage, Sue Young, Lauren, Anna. Okay, I'm missing Dennis Shu, Kong, and Hui Zhou. Anyone whose name I didn't call. Okay, pretty good. All right. Okay, chapter 16. Muslim empires. Now, and as far as I know, I've never met any of you before, And again, I want to say before I start, I know nothing about any of your religious convictions. And yes, I have had several Muslims in my class before. That is fine and okay, and I do not in any way make any of you feel uncomfortable. But let me also read you, if you want to contest anything I say, the floor is open. I had a Muslim woman in my class just last fall, and she would oftentimes put in her opinions, and she caught me in a parking lot as they said, "Mr. Cunningham, are you upset at me?" I said, "No, your input is very much welcome in my class. You don't have to agree with me, and if you know anything I don't or have any contrary opinion, your input is welcome." Having said that, I want to state also, this part of the world was very much ignored when I was in school. In fact, much of what I know about this part of the world, I've had to learn it in the last 13 years as I've taught it. Well, of course, the Ottoman Empire I knew about because it was so close to Europe. The Safavid and Mughal empires I knew nothing about. There are three empires here: Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal. I'll tell you right now, the Ottoman, that is what is today Turkey. This is today known as Iran, or the old name is Persia. And this one is known today as Pakistan, to cover the area of Pakistan, Nepal, in other words, northern India, and Bangladesh. The area of northern India. Okay. All right. All of these empires have a couple of things in common. Number one, they were all Muslim. They existed in the Muslim world. What is today Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, from Turkey to Pakistan, or actually from Turkey to what is today Bangladesh. Well, again, the geography is mostly arid, mostly treeless, and ironically, the Muslim religion says a lot about trees, and yet they get a part of the world where there are very few trees. They're also called the gunpowder empires. They're called that because it was gunpowder that made them. And ultimately, as your book will say it before the chapter's over, the thing that made them, the gunpowder, was the thing that later turned around and destroyed them. And you might say, how did gunpowder both make and destroy them? Simply this. They quickly grabbed onto the gunpowder weapons before anybody else and took over their neighbors. But then the Europeans were able to come along with better weapons, better rifles, better artillery, and put them back into, you might say, the Dark Ages. Eventually, what happened? At the time period we're talking about, Europeans and Muslims were kind of neck to neck technologically, but the Muslims had been far ahead of the Europeans technologically. In this chapter, the Europeans were somewhat equal, but then, before this chapter is over with, the Europeans had forged far ahead and left these people behind, and it's only been, in my own lifetime, in the last 30 or 40 years, that people from this part of the world start to reassert themselves. Otherwise, we Americans forgot them. I mean, to give you an example, I have a book at the house that was a college textbook. The book is entitled Since 1900, and it's American history from 1900 to 1969. 69 years of American history. 1969 was the year I was a junior in college, and the book was brand new. In 700 pages of text, it only mentions this part of the world in 1 or 2 little places. That's how much we ignored it. Now, any textbook written today would include a lot more about them. But we largely forgot about and ignored that part of the world for a long time. Today, this part of the world has somewhat come to the forefront, so we do need to know something about their history. And if you don't get anything else from the lesson, one thing I want you to get is they fell behind. Technologically, politically, economically, they fell behind. And why did they fall behind? In one word, I'll tell you now. I was going to wait. I'll tell you now. They lacked freedom. Now, I hope somebody has taken a look at one of the sample papers that I've had put on entitled "The Constitution is a Failure," and that paper really tells you just what was wrong with the society. In that paper, this paper, by the way, was written at another college, but it was written by a Muslim student criticizing the United States, and he made the remark that in the United States, sometimes a senator will disagree with our president, implying that that is something awful. I mean, isn't it terrible that our Congress will sometimes disagree with the president, our court sometimes disagrees with our Congress? No, it's not terrible. Inventions come through dissent. You get somebody who comes along who says, hey, the way we've been doing things is wrong, we can do it better. That's how progress is made. You may not like dissenters at first, but in this part of the world, they don't allow that kind of dissent. Hey, a leader who surrounds himself with nothing but a bunch of yes men, everybody who says yes to everything he does, you can expect that leader's going to sooner or later have a big downfall. And on a very personal note, my wife does not always agree with me in everything. I'm glad she doesn't, because I didn't really want to marry a yes woman anyway. And no, you don't want to. That shows you people who just are afraid to dissent. Well, but in this part of the world, again, they're afraid to dissent. Again, that's there's a whole problem. So if we get nothing else in the lesson, get that. They fell behind. All right, we'll start off. Let me say that we'll start off with the Ottoman Empire. I've told you already the modern name for the Ottoman Empire is Turkey, and that name comes from the Ottoman Turks. Throughout much of our history, there have been wave after wave of people come from the vast tundras of Mongolia. The earliest record we have was Attila the Hun. He came over from Mongolia. He and his Huns, and they created havoc and helped destroy the Roman Empire. The Bulgars were originally from Mongolia. Then, of course, the most famous was Genghis Khan. But the last wave of Mongolian invaders were the Turks. And they came to what the country we today call Turkey. Before that, it was called Asia Minor or Anatolia. It had some other names. But they took over the land of Turkey. Turkey had belonged to the Byzantine Empire, which was left over from the Roman Empire. Anyway, there'll be two names, don't you remember, and they're both Ottoman names. The name of the man who conquered Constantinople was Mehmed II, and that ended the Byzantine Empire. And then the next one, I'll come to him in a little bit. But anyway, the Ottoman Turks came in and found the Byzantine Empire to be a little bit weak, so they were able to come in and take over. The city of Constantinople was well fortified, and they had a tough time with it, but they finally got together an army of 100,000 men, and Constantinople only could get together about 5,000 fighting men. They had been greatly reduced in size, but even then, it was a difficult city to conquer, but they conquered it. The Europeans did not do a whole lot to help. Now that was to change later. But Mehmed II conquered Constantinople and ended the Byzantine Empire. All right. He had dreams of going into Europe and conquering all of Europe, but he just simply was not able to do so. The Muslim world had control of a lot of Spain up until 1492, the same year Columbus discovered America. And in 1492, they were driven out of Spain, but they still began pushing into Europe from the east. They were driven out of the west, but they were pushing in from the east. And finally, one of their leaders went into Vienna, but before he went into Vienna, they partially conquered the Bulgaria, Balkan is the name. They partially conquered the Balkan Peninsula, That includes Greece, Serbia, Albania, Macedonia, those countries there just east of Italy. Now, back in 1992 or so, actually it was about 1995 or so when Bill Clinton was president, NATO decided to send troops to quell a bunch of disturbances in this region. And I recall one talk show host, and I don't recall who it was, said, now I don't know what the cause of this conflict is, and I'm not going to look it up. Well, the cause of this conflict was this. The Muslims had made a lot of inroads into this region. And it was a region of mixed religion, Muslim and Eastern Orthodox Catholic primarily. This is going to become extremely important because this was to lead to the cause of World War I. When a man from the Balkan region shot dead the heir to Austria's throne and got a whole big war started and killed millions of people. And again, because it was Eastern Orthodox Catholic. Now that may mean little to you, but it meant a lot to people there. That meant that the most powerful Eastern Orthodox Catholic country in the world at that time, Russia, was going to move in and help. Well, believe me, this applies to 2014 because even as recently, even in the year 2014, when this region gets in some kind of trouble, the Russians promise we'll move in and we'll assist. The Russians still have an affinity with Serbia, and it was Russia's affinity with Serbia that was to lead to getting World War I started. And you notice I keep saying Eastern Orthodox Catholic. Why is that important? Well, for this reason. The Byzantine Empire was also Eastern Orthodox Catholic. And that explains why the Roman Catholic Europe would not move in and help and let them be conquered by the Muslims. That's a big part of the reason. But then, after the Muslims conquered part of the Balkan region, they moved into Vienna. Vienna was the capital of a Roman Catholic country, and the Roman Catholics moved in droves and stopped the Muslim advance. Now, two times the Muslims went into Vienna, 1580 and 1683. About 100 years apart. Don't worry about the dates so much, but they moved into the city of Vienna, moved against Vienna, and both times Europeans rose up to help the Austrians, and they stopped the Muslim advance into Europe, and the Muslims vowed, we'll return and conquer. They didn't. Now, I want to tell you something that every Muslim really knows. If they could have remained united, they could have probably conquered the world. As it was, they started fighting among themselves, and their fighting among themselves continues to this moment. I mean, I'm now fast forward to 2014, you find Egypt is fighting Egypt, Syria is fighting Syria, Algeria is fighting Algeria, Libya is fighting Libya, and who all else? I mean, they're fighting hard amongst themselves. This happens now with no offense to the Muslims, but any time a movement gets so large, it cannot hold together very well, and they start factioning among themselves, fighting among themselves. But again, they would have conquered possibly the whole world if they could have remained united. But then that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is after 1680, their technology just fell far behind Europe as Europeans developed better rifles, better artillery, and better methods of fighting. They developed better armor and trained armies. And again, I'm going to jump ahead of the story a little bit. Almost every Muslim country was conquered. Algeria was conquered by France. I mean, I'm jumping ahead. Italy conquered Libya. Great Britain conquered Egypt, Syria, and France conquered Iran and Iraq. And France also conquered much of the Sahara Desert. The Muslim world wound up becoming subservient to the European world for a long time. Then came World War II, and it became unpopular to have colonies, and all these Muslim countries got their independence again. But they still lagged behind for a while. Then oil was discovered, and oil gave them a lot of money, and they enabled them to somewhat reassert themselves. All right, anyway, that's jumping. That's where all this is going to lead. But back to the time period we're talking about. The other leader, remember, was the last one to try to conquer Vienna was Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman was an able leader, but he had a problem. He was afraid that to understand what his problem was, you have to understand a problem that all of Islam has had from the beginning of time. One thing Muhammad never made clear was who takes the place of a leader when the leader dies. And in our country we have a constitution. The constitution says if the president dies or resigns, vice president takes over. In the Catholic Church, if the Pope dies or resigns, they call it the College of Cardinals together and they appoint a leader. It's written in their constitution. In a Muslim country, when a leader dies, everybody who has any power at all jumps in to try to kill off everybody else to make sure he's the one on top. And the one who's still alive, when it's all over with, he becomes a leader. This has happened much too often. And again, if you don't like what I'm saying, you're welcome to contest it. But this has happened much too often in Muslim history. Yes?
You said this guy right here.
Suleiman.
Yeah, he was the last person
To try to conquer Vienna. Yeah, and it's around 1680. I mean, that's one thing to remember before. He went into Vienna, but he also did something else. He had a harem. I mean, these leaders had a harem. The harem was the private domain of the Sultan, the place where the Sultan's wives were kept. And these sultans would marry a whole bunch of women, any woman who they pleased. And they would oftentimes have a bunch of sons, but these sons of the Sultan were kept away from everybody else, which is the worst thing you do for a future leader. And again, these wives would try to jockey their own son into position. They'd have secret meetings with the generals, and when my husband dies, will you help promise to get my son on the throne? Well, Suleiman knew that this was the way things operated when a leader died, so what he did was he killed all of his sons before he died, except for one, the one he chose. Unfortunately, the one he chose was a drunk. I mean, this is what your book says about. He was a drunken, just simply, you might call him a substance abuser is a more polite term to use. Yeah, you just stretch it out. You had your hand up. Anyway, Suleiman killed all of his sons except for the one he wanted, the drunken one. And then when he died, this drunken son just simply led the Ottoman Empire into ruin. And the Ottoman Empire never fully recovered. The Ottoman Empire became known as the sick man of Europe. And it was to remain that way until 1917 when the Ottoman Empire fell for good. Again, that's something we'll talk about in a later chapter. Your book goes on to talk about the nature of the Sultan, what he was, what kind of ruler he was. Just remember the word Sultan. I will tell you this much about the test. From this chapter, there's only going to be about 6 questions, and it's going to be the high points. So don't worry, except for these 2 names here, don't worry about the rest of the names that's listed in the chapter. But yet, I do want you to remember, if nothing else, these 3 names. Ottomans, Safavid, I mean, that's what the whole chapter is about, and Moghul. All right. Now, on page 457, your book talks about the treatment of the minorities within the realm and the position of women. Now, here's what I'm going to say to you. I mean, I'll tell you this much. It appears to me, now I'd have to actually open up the old books. And I have all my old books from the time I first started in here till now. It appears to me your authors have greatly toned down what they once said about the treatment of minorities and the treatment of women. In the treatment of minorities, your book makes it seem like that Christians and Jews were able to exist. Well, there was a whole lot of tolerance. You can't make a blanket statement because it varied from generation to generation, from ruler to ruler, and even from place to place. But in general, Christians were treated as second-class inferior citizens. Anyone could convert to Islam anytime. If an Islamic person converted to another religion, he was executed. That was a penalty for conversion. So the Christians thought, hey, we'll be allowed to remain Christian, let's surrender. And then they didn't realize, hey, it's a one-way street. Your children might convert to Islam and become first-class citizens, or they might choose to remain Christian and be second-class. Christians in Turkey were told, this is not in the book, that they had to build their houses only so tall. Muslims were told they built their houses higher. So that way you could tell a Muslim house from a Christian house by the height of the house. The Muslims were higher. Christians and Jews were not allowed to ride on the back of a beast because they might meet a Muslim on foot and they'd be higher up than a Muslim, so only Muslims could ride on the backs of a beast. These laws have since been done away with. There came a man named Ataturk and changed that. Also, the Muslims were allowed to wear a tall cap that made them appear a few inches taller than they were, called the fez, the Turkish fez. Again, this cap was outlawed, but only Muslims were allowed to wear it. Christians were not, because the cap might make a Christian appear taller than a Muslim. And Christians were required to pay a tax, Christians and Jews were required to pay a tax called a jizya. Don't worry about the name. But the tax was designed to make sure that they were kept poorer. Now your book tones it down by saying they were paid a tax because they were exempt from military service. Therefore the tax took the place of the military service. But the fact of the matter is, the tax guaranteed that they would remain poorer than Muslims. So Christians and Jews were a sizable minority in these realms. Up to 40% of the population were non-Muslim. But they were a minority that, basically these Muslim countries, as time went on, got to where they would not work together because they treated their Christians and Jews as second-class citizens. Again, this is not exactly the way your book puts it these days, but that's the way they did at one time. Women, officially your book says that women were treated, technically or officially, the same way they were in other Muslim societies, but again the treatment varied from time to time and place to place. Christian women were generally treated better than, differently from Muslim women. Now, I want to state this, Muslim women have tended to be looked on by Muslim men as being property. The man owns them. The man can have up to 4 wives. A woman can only have 1 husband. The penalty for adultery for a woman is stoning to death. There is no penalty for a man. Now, the practice of stoning adulterous women to death has come under a whole lot of fire. It's one of the few things the rest of the world has called their hand on. All right, anyway, time went on, and eventually the Ottoman Empire declined. Now, that's going to be the pattern of all 3 of these empires, by the way. They came on the scene, conquered, expanded, fought against each other, and eventually declined and fell. The Ottoman Empire, the same thing, and again, what was the reason for the decline? I've already mentioned lack of freedom, lack of innovation, lack of the ability to dissent, to disagree with the rulers, and a whole lot of infighting that went on among them. Again, your book makes the point at one place that Islam might have died had it not been for these empires that were like they were a transition from the beginnings of Islam until Islam went into the modern world. And had they not rose up thanks to their use of gunpowder, Islam might very well have died. But they kept Islam alive during the late part of the Middle Ages. Then they come to the modern world where at first Islam was just seemingly hopelessly behind everybody else. Your book goes into more about Ottoman art. They were known for being able to build really magnificent mosques, of which your book shows their best example on page 460. Oh yes, something else I meant to mention. Mehmed II conquered Constantinople. and then changed its name to Istanbul. That mosque you see is in the city of Istanbul. Now, when I was about 13, they had advertised for Kellogg's Corn Flakes, and this one man in the ad asked another, "What is the corniest city on earth?" And the other man answered, "Well, the corniest city on earth is Constantinople." And the other man said, "Yeah, but they changed its name to Istanbul." Maybe that'll help you remember it. Ears and corn, those of you who know anything about farmers. These people were great at building mosques, and the Muslims are also great at weaving textiles, clothing making, and rug making. Rug making is a big part of their culture. This is true even of Persians. The Persian rugs are still considered the best in the world, even in the 21st century. Clothing, rugs. They learned how to weave designs into clothing, make a design, something that mankind seemingly had not been able to do before. All right, so much for the Ottomans. Oh yes, something else I want to say about the method of these people's methods of fighting. Back in the old days when they first started out, they fought from horseback. And they were really good at fighting in the open deserts, the open plains where there were no trees. They have proven to be very inept fighters when fighting in an area with thick vegetation, with a lot of bushes, undergrowth, not a hills. I mean, it's one thing to have an army that can just swoop down on an enemy, and they had plenty of courage to swallow them up. But then they got into Spain, and they conquered Spain for a while, but they couldn't hold it. Again, Spain is a land of a lot of mountains and a lot of trees, and they couldn't hold that Spain indefinitely. But when they went into India, which I'm about to mention, they conquered the part of India that has few trees. But then when it started drifting south into India that has a lot of vegetation, a lot of bushes, a lot of trees, they simply could not do well. And the same thing can be said for when they tried to conquer Eastern Europe and went to Vienna. They have just simply their type of fighting that they learned from Mohammed, or learned while they were fighting in the desert, just does not work when fighting in an area with a lot of trees. All right, the Safavids. The Safavid, I have mentioned here, it covered the area of Iran, which has always been known of as Persia. At times, its boundaries covered Iraq. They spent a lot of their time fighting the Ottoman Empire to the north and west, and a lot of time fighting the Mughal Empire to the east, and that, again, kept them from growing as much as they could have. But as was the case of the Ottomans, they came, thanks to their use of gunpowder, conquered. Their fortunes of war went back and forth for a while, and then they collapsed, as was the case of the Ottomans. What made them collapse? I'd say lack of innovation, lack of freedom, lack of working together, constant fighting amongst themselves. Their art, again, a whole lot of rug making. Your book shows a picture of the Royal Academy with a big pool in front of it. The pool is very smooth and therefore highly reflective. In a mention of literature, I want to mention this. Persian literature features stories called the Arabian Nights. Your book does not mention them in this context because the stories of the Arabian Nights actually came much earlier. And I think every American school child possibly has read some stories of the Arabian Nights. It features Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. And what's that? Aladdin and the Lamp. Yeah. Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. There's Open Sesame, that's part of the Alibaba, 40 Thieves, yeah. Sesame Seed, yeah. Again, that comes from an earlier time period. It has been said that the Arabian Nights is the Muslim world's greatest contribution to the field of literature. Again, I'm going to commend them. It is fairly high quality literature. Your book only deals with the Safavids for a couple of pages. Then we move on finally to the Mughals. Again, if you look on the map, you'll notice the Mughals were covered part of northern India, and it looks on the map like they had most of India. And again, they had several things going in their favor. Number one, the people of India were using elephants to fight, and it was finally learned that a man on a horse was better than an elephant. And what way was simply the man on a horse could actually fight a foot soldier, the elephant could not. And the man on the elephant was actually too far off the ground to be an effective fighter of persons who were not on elephants. Also, the horses were much faster. And if you're faster than your enemy, you can decide whether to fight him or not. If you decide he's too much for you, all you got to do is turn and run. But if you're faster than he is and he doesn't want to fight you, he can't run if you want to fight him. So speed is a big advantage, and horses have that advantage. The advantage over elephants. The Muslims also had better rifles at first, but again, they could not conquer the southern part of India. And part of this, I think, has to do with their mounted cavalry was effective, very effective in fighting in an open desert, and far less than effective in fighting in an area with a lot of vegetation. Your book mentions Akbar, but don't worry about that name. Or Babur. Again, Babur was the founder of the great Mughal dynasty. But it looked for a while like the Muslims were going to conquer all of India, and they had actually the majority of India. But they were not able to pull it off. Now I had, about 4 or 5 years ago, a student from India, and he is still upset with the Muslims. He said that your book doesn't tell enough how the Muslims came in and forced people to convert at sword point. Now, I want to say this about this conversion at sword point. The Muslims have been accused of converting by fire and sword. From the very beginning, your authors, Dwight and Spielberg, have downplayed that. But now the truth is, the truth is it varies from time to time and place to place. Certain generations of Muslim conquerors did try to convert by fire and sword, and many of them did not. Some of your Muslim rulers were very tolerant of other religions, and some were not. The Europeans living in the Balkan regions had to undergo some really gruesome torture that I don't want to describe in order to force them to convert, and some of them remain nominal converts from that day to this, because once in the Muslim religion, you don't dare leave. And again, I have no doubts that some of the people of India, in some places, in some times, in some generations, were forcibly converted. But again, your authors have chosen to downplay that.
It's called Sword and Blood.
What's that?
It was called Sword and Blood.
Fire and sword. Yeah, Muhammad, the original prophet, that was the term he used. He said, we're going to conquer by fire and sword. We're going to force them into conversion. And the Muslims have denied that they use it. And again, if you read Muhammad, you'll find it was almost like you're reading two different authors. There was Muhammad, the first, who was more tolerant. Then late in his life, he became much more hardened. And he contradicted a lot of the mild-mannered ways he had earlier in his life. Religion and state. Now, one thing that the Muslim world has never been able to do is separate religion from state. Why is this important? Well, it is known that societies that separate religion from state advance farther than the ones who don't. And I want to go on record as saying one of the things that Western Europe did right was they wound up separating religion from state, church from state. Now, I mean, this picture is not, there were times when the church controlled the state. I think that was wrong. There were times when church and state were at each other's throats. That was wrong. When the smoke cleared, both Catholic and Protestant wound up, the church was the church independent of the state, and the state was the state independent of the church. The Muslim world has never been able to achieve this independence. The Byzantine Empire also was never able to achieve this, and Latin America, we'll talk about Latin America from time to time, they've never been able to separate church from state. The places that have generally advanced technologically, scientifically. The places that have not, and again, nothing against the church, it's just the church should not be married to the state. And the state should not be married to the church. And this is something that most people today would, I mean, most Americans at least would agree with. Even your avid churchmen say church and state should be separate. Islamic world was not able to make any separation between the two. Then to the part about Europeans coming into India. And this was one of the things that led to the twilight of the Mughals. In the year 1497, just 5 years after Columbus discovered America, a ragged, dirty European ship crossed the Indian Ocean, having gone around Africa, and landed in India. At first he was welcome. Nobody would have guessed that this scurvy crew of dirty, ragged sailors in a dirty, ragged ship would make a big dent on Indian society. Who would have thought it? But this European ship went back home with the spices and came back with a large fleet of ships within a year. Then they came back with even more ships. And eventually the Europeans discovered, hey, these people don't have a strong military. And the Europeans got the idea we can conquer them. Now, I hope most of you know that Great Britain once had 13 colonies in North America. And they lost to 13 North American colonies. And yes, Georgia is one of the colonies. But when Great Britain lost its 13 North American colonies, to save face, they went around Africa and they conquered India in the place of the 13 North American colonies that they lost. I mean, hey, I didn't even see the connection until someone, and then a Pakistani man at Lockheed explained to me one time that the connection was Great Britain had lost its 13 colonies, so they went around to conquer India. And they had a fairly easy time conquering India because by this time the British had really better weapons. And one of the men who helped conquer India was the same man who had surrendered in North America. His name was Lord Cornwallis. Now anybody who studied America, who was Lord Cornwallis? Anybody remember? He was the British general who surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown, the last battle of the Revolutionary War. He surrendered to General Washington and ended the Revolutionary War. Well, Cornwallis came home in defeat. The British said, well, we realize you had a tough problem, and made him commander of another army and sent him to India. But the real hero of the conquest of India was not Cornwallis, merely an assistant. The real hero was Robert Clive. I'm not going to write the name down. Clive. Robert Clive went to India, and slowly, we might say one province at a time, he conquered India until Great Britain had conquered virtually all of India. Sir Robert Clive. They set up the East India Company, and its job was to create wealth for Great Britain. Again, they lost their trade with the 13 colonies. They told the 13 colonies, you must only trade with us. You'll trade in our favor. You must buy our products, and you must sell the best of your products to us only. Well, the Americans said no. Fought a 6-year-long war and drove the British out. So then the British took over India and did the same things. They set up the East India Company that in effect said to the Indian people, you must trade with us. Now, eventually, India was to rebel, just like the United States did, and in 1947, India became independent. They were under Britain's control for almost 200 years. Now we're going to talk more about the British in India later. The British ran into problems in India. I mean, for one thing, there was in the Indian practice of child marriages where 9-year-old girls would get married to men who were oftentimes in their 30s and 40s. And if you think this is bad enough, they had this other practice that when the wife died, when the husband died, the wife was expected to light a big fire and throw herself on the fire and commit suicide in a ceremony called the Zanj. And when the British took over India, they were told by the rest of Europe, hey, you must end these evil practices. So in addition, they had the practice of keeping a bunch of people called outcasts, untouchables, in a state of total, complete poverty, and treating them like worse than slaves. And again, the rest of Europe told the people told the British, you've got to change these, you've got to convert these Indians and change their uncivilized ways. Now, I'm not saying the people of India were uncivilized, but the Europeans looked on them as being such at the time. And the British they had awkward problems. And of course, this man at Lockheed, this Pakistani, had a problem that the British had. They sent their most unsuccessful of people, the worst of the people, over to govern Britain, because the best of the governors remained behind in Britain, so they sent the ones who could not govern and incapable. The fact is, for any European to come in and try to govern India was going to be a difficult job at best. Because, again, the people of India had some practices that were very much against the mores or the morals of the Europeans. Your book, again, talks about the economy. In one word, folk, the economy consists of farming. Women, your book talked about how the women were adept at spinning thread. The spinning wheel was a big part of Indian culture. And keep this in mind, because later we're going to run into a man named Gandhi who used the spinning wheel as his example of going back the old ways. Now, the spinning wheel, folk, with all due respect, is a primitive way to spin yarn. The British and the Europeans and the Americans went through what's called the Industrial Revolution, where they found better ways to make cloth, to make higher quality cloth and better cloth and put it out cheaper. But the Indian women were great at, again, spinning, using a spinning wheel. Your book talks about how that women did make some advances during the Mughal rule. They became allowed to inherit land, allowed to own property, and even sometimes took care of business activities. But for the most part, they were relegated to the role of second-class citizens. And in this context, I don't see where your book mentions the practice of zanj, or the practice of the women throwing themselves on a fire when their husbands died. Now, I mean, keep in mind, if a 9-year-old girl marries a 40-year-old man, make one big guess as to which one of them would like to die first. I mean, you can say, oh, sometimes the 9-year-old girl might die, perhaps. But generally, it was the man who died first. And the whole purpose in having the woman throw herself on the fire was so she would not be a burden to her family. Without a husband to take care of her, the family would not have to. So she would get rid of herself. What's that? What's that? Well, okay, yeah, hey, folks, we got to understand these people. By our standards, it sounds loud stuff. But now keep in mind, talk about child marriages. This practice went on in a lot of the world, and it is known that the Prophet Muhammad himself had a 9-year-old wife, and she lived only a few months after they married, and when she died, he died shortly thereafter. He died mostly probably from a broken heart. And you might think, doesn't this show, by our standards, it's pedophilia? But keep in mind that their lives in those days were short. When the average lifespan was 22 or 23 years, but they felt like they didn't have the time in their life that we had. So, and again, we can criticize them, but you've got to try to put yourself back in the time period they lived in. And if the neighbors were doing it, if their ancestors had done it, they didn't see anything greatly wrong with it. I mean, I'm not saying it was right, but again, by their standards, by their way of thinking, there wasn't much wrong. All right, anybody have any comments? Don't forget, be checking the weather. I mean, of course, by the time Wednesday gets here, all the snow might be gone, but sometimes these snowstorms come later than they predict. And oh yeah, let me say this. If we don't have a class on Wednesday for any reason, my plan is to still have the test on Monday. Now that's on the syllabus, if for any reason.
After the Super Bowl?
Huh?
Even after the Super Bowl?
Yeah, that's what I mean, because see, I can't easily put it off. I mean, hey, yeah, I tell you what, you can be looking at your history book while the Super Bowl, while these men are knocking each other out and creating concussions and setting themselves up for a life of, by being bipolar later, I mean, which some people believe that it leads to. And I mean, they hit for keeps. But anyway, enjoy the Super Bowl. And hey, I'll tell you something about studying for the test. I mean, really, if you just forgot all about it on Sunday, you might do better on Monday. If you study on Thursday and Friday and Saturday hard, close the books and get away from it on Sunday. How many of you have heard this before? You might do really well. Good for you. You might do really well on the test come Monday. But don't stay up all night Sunday night. And I've got a minute or two. I had a student come to me after the last class I taught on Thursday. Mr. Cunningham, this is a lot of material. Hey, I know it is, but you're all on a level playing field. My other classes have gotten it. You can too. I must say this, 2/3 of my students make A's and B's at the end of the course. So 2/3 one who finish, if that's any encouragement to you. All right. I'll see you Wednesday.